I gave up so much of myself to be in relationships. This is Tracy with Tracy Talks, a podcast about life, looking at life from a new perspective to gain wisdom and understanding in hopes to know yourself more. I don't think I was looking at relationships from a very good perspective. I went into my marriage wanting to really focus on the marriage, build that connection, create that connection, and create a tight bond between us. And while that sounds noble, it sounds like a good idea to really focus on the marriage and our relationship and our bond. That sounds like a really good idea, but looking back now, I wouldn't do that again. I spent so much time identifying as the wife, as the married person. And I gave up friendships. I felt like that was what I was expected to do. Those friendships, there was no formal disconnection. There was a just slowly letting go. And it was a different time back then as well when I first got married. We didn't have the apps, we didn't have the texting, we didn't have all of these ways of communication. So you literally had to get on the phone and talk to somebody on a landline. It was easier to disconnect back then. And pretty soon after a year or two goes by, I started to feel isolated because there was really nobody to talk to discuss what I was feeling, what was I experiencing. There was nobody for me really to confirm everything that was happening in me and how I was changing. I didn't anticipate entering into the marriage that I was actually going to shift and change. I didn't think about that. But I became increasingly isolated. Then after I had a couple of kids, just the whole routine and the demands and the pressures of just normal everyday life, the expectations, there's just a lot to process. There's a lot of emotions to process. There's just a lot of everything. When I isolated myself, I disconnected from those friends. I didn't have anyone to talk to about how I was feeling except my husband. And our relationship wasn't necessarily one where it was easy to talk to. He always took a very condescending tone, a superior tone with me, as if he knew everything, as if he knew what I was feeling. That became a problem. Because then if I'm always feeling like me expressing my emotions is something bad, then what do? You stop expressing them. If somebody makes you feel bad or doesn't respond in the way that feels supportive, then why even share? Why even talk about what I'm feeling? My natural progression then went to self-help, looking for books about me and who I was and what I needed. And that's around the same time when the spiritual side of me was starting to come online, and there was a pull for me to really go within and understand what I was feeling and why and what I needed to do and what I needed in my life. And because I had spent so much time focused on the relationship, focused on him, focused on the family, when I started to work on myself, I can only assume that felt like a threat to him. It felt like a threat to the marriage. It felt like a threat to the relationship. He would get very defensive and pout and act out. Me wanting to work on myself became a threat to him. And I won't do that again. I won't give up my individual needs. I won't give up my individual friends. I won't give up my individual interests. I have learned that two people really need to maintain their own identity first. We need to be two whole, complete individuals who happen to come together in a marriage. But I am not dependent upon him, and he is not dependent upon me. Looking back on those early days, I was insecure about who I am. And so I didn't encourage him to maintain relationships with his friends. I didn't encourage him to do solo activities or maintain those interests. And I know a lot of times, a lot of women feel like there is more of an opportunity for him to be unfaithful. There's more of an opportunity for him to do things that we don't want them to do. And I guess I have kind of completely did a 180 on that. Now, I would rather him go do something, show me who he is, and so I can then end the relationship. If he's going to cheat, if he's going to be unfaithful, better to have him do it quickly so I can move on. I remember there being so much energy invested into feeling like, is he ever going to leave? Feeling that insecurity come up within me about circumstances like that. And so I didn't want him to do things. I didn't want him to develop that independence. And now I see what a huge mistake that was. Sure, go. Do what you need to do. If you're going to cheat, he's going to cheat. If he's going to be unfaithful, he's going to be unfaithful. Why not get that out of the way up front so we both can exit? Just as much as I need to maintain my individual identity, so does the person I am in relationship with. I don't want to be someone's emotional support. I don't want to be someone's 100% emotional support. That is too much pressure on a person and on a marriage. And I cannot depend 100% on one person. Because let me tell you, when it came time for the marriage to end, I didn't have those friends to call. I didn't have that support. I went through so much of it alone because I hadn't maintained those friendships. I hadn't put myself first. It was so much more painful. It was so harder than it needed to be. And that's what a lot of us women do. We want so badly for that relationship to be the one. And it was a mistake for me. It was one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn. But I didn't have a friend to call and say, hey, I'm having a really bad day. Because I hadn't talked to them in years. We didn't have regular days out. We didn't have those relationships. Growing up, there was so much of an emphasis on being selfish. And whenever we put ourselves first, we were selfish. And thankfully, the dialogue around that has changed, that it's simply just being promoted that we all need to put our own mental and emotional and physical health ahead of everything else. But that was a lot of the programming that I had to overcome. That I have to be first. I have to continue to maintain my whole identity. And if someone can't support that in me, if someone can't support me in me remaining a whole person, they're not my person. They're not. There is someone out there who's going to love me and want me to be a healthy, independent individual who is an equal match for me. Thinking back to high school and looking at the required classes and the elective classes that we were encouraged to take. It was drama, or one of those where you're reading Shakespeare. And while I'm sure there is some value in learning Shakespeare, I'm sure there is. But you know what would have really been helpful is if we actually had classes about communicating and relationships and the cliff notes. We need cliff notes on this of how do you talk to somebody? What is the expectation of marriage? What does it mean to be in a committed relationship? Why were we spending weeks talking about Shakespeare when we can't even manage basic communication with each other? When I think back to some of this stuff, my mind is simply blown. Blown. Oh, what I wouldn't give to know what I know now back then. Thank you for listening to this podcast of Tracy Talks. Please like and share with others who would enjoy listening to this podcast. And until next time, we meet again.